Hello, Dakota community. We are about to dive into a topic that we have been looking at for a while now, the Dunseith Debacle. Obviously, this subject has taken over the state in the intrigue surrounding the events that have been happening in Dunseith. I'd like to share a quick word of advisement. In the episode that you're about to listen to and see, there's a lot of information that's going to be shared by Mr. Charles Hoefer, which has been verified by Hoefer Group, their attorney, and in part other third parties as factual evidence. The Dakotan has not independently authenticated these materials. The opinions and views expressed in this podcast are solely those of the guest being interviewed and do not necessarily reflect my own views or the views of the Dakotan. Our goal is to provide a platform for open conversation. Thanks for tuning into this episode, and let's get started. Welcome to another episode of Indie Talk here at the Dakotan, where we are continuing our conversation with the Dunseith Debacle. It's been an interesting ride so far.
It has been. We're finally entering the fourth episode of our series here. We're getting to the part of divergence with Charles Hoefer, from when he really found everything to when some issues with the state and some departments have really started to come around.
As we've said in a lot of the episodes, before you watch this one, if you have not watched other episodes, go ahead, I guess, watch this all the way through if you'd prefer, but make sure you watch episode 1 because it's going to tell you a lot of the story to this point, and we're going to continue in that story format this time, and we are excited to once again have our guest with us, Charles Hoefer. Thanks for joining us today, Charles.
Thank you for having me, guys.
Pleasure as always. I look forward to it.
Absolutely. And so, as mentioning, we're going to go a little bit of a story format. Obviously, there was 2 episodes. This is our 4th episode, as Kyler mentioned. Episodes 2 and 3 were evidence focused. There was a lot of evidence that was presented. And this one, we're going to go a little bit different style, where we're going to go back to that story as we talk about I'll say the word alleged cover-up. You'll have different feelings on that. That happened.
Very different.
Yeah. That happened 2022, that time frame and beyond. But what we are going to do, while we won't have evidence on screen today, we're going to actually have an evidence file drop where people can just go through and check out all the facts. And maybe sometimes we will reference stuff, maybe we won't, but there'll be a lot of documents that you're able to go through on your time and see all the facts of what has been presented.
Wow.
Yeah, we've agreed to do a huge dump. So I think it's going to be similar in size or bigger to the one Dustin Gowrilo got, except it's going to be everything that people don't want you
and
to
the
see.
one that you're referencing that Dustin got, there was an open records request that was done, I believe actually last year. And some of that information, maybe a little bit more, was given to Dustin from the state. And there is, as of shooting of this podcast, we're not aware of a second drop that's supposed to be coming from the state. So this drop should beat that, and you can check out all that information directly from Charles Hoefer. Exciting.
Well, thanks, guys. Yeah, appreciate it. Should we dive in?
Let's go.
Where do you want
Let's
to start
dive in.
today?
So,
Get into it.
so far our audience knows about the things that have happened in Dunseith, the
things you found, the activities that you found were going on there in that prior, from at least 2015 to 2022 or 3.
Defense and flight sensor parts being worked on in the town, stuff hidden in our building, evidence receipts,
rooms.
federal crime scene reports, and public records discovered showing that state and federal officials in North Dakota had been involved in what we had to report as crimes in order to get our site cleaned up. What we have not talked about, and in your first episode that you referenced, we got to right when we started finding things, and then we stopped. And then from there, we said, okay, here's what we found, and here's the evidence of all of that, just to prove that that was true. This one, it's one that's, I would say, more dangerous for me. It's one I don't really like talking about, because in order to do it, I have to name all the names of the people who've been involved trying to oppose our getting relief, our cleaning up, and then retaliating against us for having done so. I tried for a very long time to believe that people had some shred of good faith. And I think that whatever we discovered, either what we already know or what we don't know, is so severe that it's resulted in extreme retaliation, safety threats, stalking, hacking, all kinds of stuff, and financial retaliation of different sorts. So those are the things, if it's all right with you, that I think we talk about today. I think we pick up in September where episode one left off of
I think
2022.
that's the best way to go about it. Really, and again, thank you for sharing all of this and opening the light and the doorway to a lot of this. It'll be we appreciate you getting your story out here. So let's start back in September 2022. You have found all of these different things on location, and you're trying to contact authorities to get the stuff cleaned up.
Yeah, and I mean, I think to put the weight to this episode, what did we find? We
Yeah.
found nuclear related stuff. We found defense missile sensor technology. We found flight sensor technology. We found evidence of a scheme that had been running for years and was still continuing in the community that should have been shut down in 2015 when that facility closed. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars of direct fraud, and if they can't trace it, then potentially, 3.5 to $4 billion of a flight sensor supply chain that's impacted with imminent public safety risks. So all those things are the things that we found. Had to clean it up because in that industry, if your address is a location of work, crimes can fall on you. So basically, we were sold crimes. And who were we sold them from? State and local government. They're the ones that brokered the facility to us and sold it to us. And then it turned out that there had been tons of official participation in what occurred. So we started to discover all kinds of irregularities. We talked about some of that in episode one. And we were told by Department of Commerce, who had a big loan into our business. And then once we started finding things, we were frozen from being able to put a first mortgage on the site, which was going to override and become the biggest loan into the project very quickly. And we had to basically lean on relationships we had in the state to figure out, hey, how do we resolve what we found? I mean, we knew it was bad. We didn't know how bad then. And so we were told, and we had text messages and emails in the month of August 2022, had a phone call with former Commissioner Josh Teagan for Commerce, Shaden Akison, head of investments, Hannah Lang, who was the venture manager for NDDF, the North Dakota Development Fund, Agent Craig Zachmeyer, BCI special agent, one of the lead agents for Drew Wrigley. And they all began to get involved, and they told us we'd have the state's full support. And they thought that there was misuse against our address, financial crimes, potentially targeting the TIN number of our business, all kinds of things that needed to be basically understood and removed, both cleaning the site and cleaning the address and making sure that our entity wasn't impacted. So promise of full support, text messages from Agent Zach Meyer saying he's pressing charges against a local on September 13th. And then September 14th, we find the first documents that kind of frankly terrify us. It was Lockheed Martin missile schematics.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
And
So
yeah, it was in a
it's in a closet.
closet.
So what's your thoughts when you open up a closet and you find these documents that are like, whoa, this is not something I as a citizen am supposed to see?
Yeah, I mean, Zach Meyer walked off the site in August with a nuclear technical file and then a month later denied it to other agents. And he told us he was taking it to the FBI for evaluation and then sent me a text and said, IRS says hold everything else in your building for the financial crimes. So then we're tearing out the facility, like racing at full speed, trying to catch up from the mess that was caused by some local interference. And we were really making progress to just get into full production launch as quick as we could, finish all of our financing and move fast. And we wanted to make up time because in our mind, we're already 2, 3 months behind. It's already a few $100,000. We got to move quick. So we get into tearing out, section by section, room by room, and we're finishing up what's called building 1, and there's an old office supplies closet that no one had touched yet, and we told the guys, I mean, everything's rotted and junked, and we said, "Gut it, rip it, pull it all out." And so they do, and in the back of it, there's a file cabinet. In the file cabinet, there's like 5 folders, and one of them is stuffed full of missile schematics, for Lockheed Martin. And someone associated with the old operation somewhat panicked and said that stuff wasn't even supposed to be printed when we operated.
Wow.
And so, we start looking at it, and it's the guided multiple launch rocket system, the number one missile bought by the
Sure.
military through the Army. Mostly, I think the procurement is either entirely or primarily done by the Army and then distributed to other agencies.
These
So
are things that
we
civilian
try.
eyes should even be on at this point.
No,
At
I don't
least,
think
yeah,
so.
as
I
far
mean,
as we could,
it's,
as someone coming into the situation blankly, seeing that this is something you would assume you shouldn't be looking at.
I was terrified to
Completely
look at it.
understandably,
And
yeah.
I mean, yeah. So it was closed up the folders and made calls to Agent Zachmeyer, who was our only contact at the time, who had told us that he was working with the FBI on a nuclear file that we were turned over to him in August, which was mixed in amongst other things, a record of Chinese sales in 2019. And he just told us it all had to be false invoices, which we bought into as well, that everything was fake and it was just a huge financial embezzlement scheme. And initially we bought into it because everything from 2016 on was done with whiteout and label
Weird.
makers. And there were a bunch of tracking numbers, but they were printed on the invoices. And he just said, this, who knows what
Yeah.
this all is.
It doesn't look like the most professionally
So,
done situation or setup by any means.
I mean, whatever it was off
Sure.
the books. There's
Yep.
no doubt about it. And we didn't have a lot of the benchmark direct evidence yet. I mean, everything was being supposedly sent to like Benchmark or Lockheed, or just this blanket record of overseas Chinese sales, but we didn't know what exactly. And what it said it was, in talking to someone who knew that old program, they said it can't be what it says because if it is, we're all in big trouble. And so, Craig doesn't take my calls. I get a hold of someone named Casey down in the AG's office, and he's Craig's boss supposedly, and he says, "I'll have him call you." So then, uh, the next day we get in touch with Craig, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm gonna come up there," and he plans for a Friday
Sure.
visit on September 16th. That
What year?
night,
Sorry.
uh, this is 2022, and I mean, we should not be having this discussion today. That's the
Yep.
main point. The main point is this should have been wiped off in a
Yep.
week, and we're with 100 and some employees right now. So I finish that Thursday night. I stay late, uh, take a person that knows the site, and we're going through and trying to see, have we missed anything else? And we thought we had already torn out and emptied out the bulk of the building, and start going into cabinets. And I open the drawer of this cabinet after going through about 150 cabinets, and it's filled with all these electronic
Whoa.
circuits. And I pull something out and I go, "Hey, what's this?" And then he looks over at me and he goes, "And now you stop looking." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "Now we wait for Craig." And so I just closed up the drawer. I was told it's stuff to do with cans and probably Navy and other stuff. And so I, um, you know, wait for the next morning, and Agent Zachmeyer shows up on September 16th with Special Agent Richard Gene Brown from Air Force OSI, Office of Special Investigations, and he's from the Minot base. And he spends a quick bit of time with us at the facility. I, offer to let him search the building. He asks if he can. I say, "Please." I'm worried that maybe there wasn't a proper scrub in 2015 at this site, like I was told that there was by state and local officials. And I said, I'm worried something might have happened after, but I was told this place was shuttered. And so, search it. And so me and Zach Meyer and Brown start climbing through every cabinet. Cause I mean, by this point, we've gutted so much of the site that like we've got a 10,000 square foot section that's just loaded up with cabinetry and
Jeepers.
furniture. And so we have to shove cabinets to the side to be able to open drawers. And we spend an hour just climbing over furniture and cabinets and checking every drawer and things we can find. And then there's this section that the locals had stuffed with junk in front of cabinets and it had just been cleared. And he said, "What about that section?" And I said, "Well, that was emptied a long time ago because that's what I
Sure.
was told." And we go in and we start looking at it, and all of a sudden we start opening drawers, and like the drawers are probably 30 inches deep and they're filled with documents and
Wow.
parts. And Brown pulls out a file and I say, "Do you need me to call someone to identify what you're looking at?" And he puts the file back in the drawer and he says, "Nope, your site wasn't scrubbed. Give me your keys. Air Force is
So
taking over."
Wow.
Richard Brown said
And
that.
Richard Brown said
As
that,
of
and I've got a tape recording with Agent Zach Meyer months later confirming that that was what was done
Wow.
initially.
so in theory, as of
Um,
September 16th,
Go ahead.
2022, you should have given your keys up for a week or two, left the site. It should have been scrubbed, got the keys back, end of story.
Absolutely. And he apologized. He said this wasn't done right. And he told me, he said, "How many keys do you have out? We need to start taking like control numbers and getting this all set up. And then you won't have access to your facility." But he said, "We should be able to give it back to you in under a week." And I said, "Okay, that's great. Anything I can do to help?" I said, "I'm really, sorry and completely surprised by all of this, but I'll cooperate in any way you want." And so I later find out that those drawers have uh, parts and documents related to things like tactical HG 1700 Honeywell gyros, the GG 1320 gyro program, which is in missile
Mm-hmm.
spacecraft, jets, and commercial aviation, B-52 program, and the guided multiple launch rocket system. So that's what was in those drawers. I didn't know that for many months. But he goes and he spends 1 or 2 hours outside in a light rain while me and Zach Meyer are literally just staring at the ceiling in a conference room. And he comes in and he says, "My bosses want one more guy with eyes on." Kyler, any idea who that guy might
I
be?
got a sneaky suspicion this is when Special Agent Daniel Brejo might be coming into the case.
Oh, yeah.
You're a winner.
Came in in
I'm glad I guessed right.
cargo shorts and a t-shirt in the afternoon. And he starts kind of barking around and says, "Well, what'd you find?" And so Brown just has a sour look on his face and he puts his hand on the desk on top of a bunch of parts and just turns his eyes away from it and pushes it over like this. And Brejo starts looking at it and says, "Do you have the whole can?" Well, at this point, I mean, I
What
don't
a
even know
can
what
is.
this
Yeah.
ring laser gyro is. So I'm like, "Well, we've got these circuits. I don't know what else is in the building." And he said, "Well, if it's not the whole can, it's not as bad." I say, "Okay."
So he immediately knew what it was, though.
And oh, he immediately knew what it was. And I've talked to people from the base who know what it
Interesting.
is. I mean, it's a critical avionic part and it's supposed to be done in a very controlled facility. That facility functioned like a
Yeah.
skiff. And it had classified access. I learned almost about 9, 10 months later.
Wow.
So it was basically, and I apologize. Today, I'm not going to hold anything back
Don't.
on the
Yeah.
facts because if I do, it waters down what happened. So it was, he starts looking at stuff. Then he says, "Well, what else do you have?" And we pull this bin of like 1,000 different files and records. And he starts looking through it all and he goes, "This is all fake." So what do you mean it's fake? And he said, "The tracking numbers are fake." He said, "It's obvious there's, financial crimes here." And he said, "Craig, he's got the theft and the financial stuff." And then Craig said, "Yeah, the IRS is working all that." And he said, "But, he said, normally what we do here is we just dig a hole in the ground and put it all in." And he said, "And then, we move on." He said, "Worst case, it's like $500,000 of State Department like fraud or ITAR violations. And he said, that's about it. And so I said, well, he said, oh, and then he said, my jurisdiction is, if there's overseas. And we said, well, there's a Chinese record here. And then eyes go up and he looks at it and he says, ah, that's fake. And it had a sticky note, yellow sticky note with a FedEx account number on it. And it was a year-long record of sales to China, which was mixed in with the flight sensors and a missile log.
It's an interesting place to be kept.
So yeah, I mean, it could have been number two pencils for all I know when I was asked by DOD in interviews, 10
Yep.
months later. But then they said, did you see evidence of number two pencil manufacturing at your site? And I said, no, but I saw missile and defense and aerospace sensors. And so he then starts having discussion and, he says, look, it's out of my jurisdiction because, it's just this, fake records and I can't prove anything without shipping logs. I said, well, for IRS, we've been building up this room of all this stuff we haven't checked yet. We just have workers put it there. And I said, there could be stuff there. And then Brown says, and there's these cabinets. And I mean, Brown didn't even go through much. He just said, there's these cabinets and they're full of stuff. And he said, that doesn't matter very much. He said, we'll just see what the State Department has to say. Because he said, for my jurisdiction, it's exports, unauthorized exports. And then Brown says, well, my jurisdiction's nuclear. And then I'm on the phone with the person who knows what was found and say, well, Craig took a nuclear file off the site. He was going to take it to FBI. And then Craig looks up really quick and goes, no, I didn't. And then we said, yes, Craig, you did. You took it. You walked off the site with it. You said you were taking it to FBI. And we both said it and we both saw it. And so the one was on the phone on speaker with the agents, and I was in person in the conference room. And he quickly opens up his big briefcase and starts filing through all this stuff. And then finally, he just takes a deep breath and he goes like this and sighs. And then Brown looks at me and goes, well, anything else nuclear, we need to know about it. And so he's sitting there looking at B-52 files, telling me anything else nuclear. I mean, he already knows what's there.
He has a great idea of what's going to be in that facility at this point.
He knows. And the FBI later told me from Minot that they knew about 7 months later when I finally met him. So he knows what's there. And then they start talking about how, they're going to go talk to the State Department. So Brejo, he has like an hour phone call that he says is with the State Department. I later find out he's lying. And the way I find out is the following week I speak to the State Department and they say we never heard from him. And if this happened, we would have heard. So then he comes back in and they're like, if there's any proof of any activity actually occurring for aerospace and defense after 2015, or if there's any real shipping records found which will prove it, or that, your site's broken into, it's a full-scale investigation, we're going to take control. Otherwise, Craig's got the local crimes and the financial crimes with IRS, and then they write up a BCI crime receipt to take everything. And then Brejo says, if you find exports, it's me. Brown says nuclear, it's me. And then they all say they'll step in and immediately help. Because I'm like, guys, that people are panicking over what this is probably. And it's probably why I've just had months of sabotage on my business. I said, this probably leaves me at risk and my site at risk if you leave me with this stuff on the site. And they said, no, if anyone tries to break in or anything like that, we're coming straight in. We'll take control of the site. We'll clean it up. Otherwise, we need to wait for the State Department. And they say to wait until Monday. So then I say, well, look, pull up this record in the red box. And it's a 2019 record. It says Chiptronics. It was given to some officials. And it says reworked 360 cans last month. And I say, what about that? And they say, well, do you know anybody who knows the site? And I say, well, Dave Lehman was up there a few times. And Dave is the commerce manufacturing manager. So we call Dave. And I say, Dave, I'm sitting here with some agents. Can I put you on speakerphone? Because we need to find out, if you know anything about what's been going on in the past because of Tuttle. And so I said, the question everyone wants to know is, was there any type of aerospace or defense work that took place or any benchmark work that took place after the site closed in 2015? And without missing a beat, Dave goes, well, I know they reworked cans for benchmark.
Oh,
And everybody's eyes go up. And so then I say, do you know if that was defense or commercial? And he says, no, I thought it was commercial. But a year later, almost, he tells me it was his first defense
wow.
project. So he lied to the agents. And then they kind of eyes go up, but they say we can't prove it without shipping records. So I protest that I want my site taken, like Brown said he was going to do. And they say, you know, we immediately will. If you start getting issues,
Right.
break-ins, you know, find the records, then it's immediate. Otherwise, we've got to wait on the State Department. I said, can you confirm all this in writing? And can I have foreign nationals on the site? Because the next day, I'm being visited by the Minister of Transportation for Manitoba.
Sure.
Okay.
And so they said, yeah, we can put it all in writing. And so we trade emails. And they say I can have foreign nationals. I need to lock up what I find. And I need to wait for further instructions from the State Department. So this is from Agent Brejo, Gene Brown, Craig Zachmeyer, North Dakota BCI, Minot Air Force OSI, and HSI, which I later find out Brejo also helped on the BCI drug task force, and he was also part-time with Air Force. So next day, let's fast forward. We have this meeting. Would you expect that 45 minutes after the meeting's over, a break-in alarm goes off at the
Wow.
site? What a
Really?
surprise.
That quickly afterwards?
We had just started rebuilding the sabotage security system, and we had just enough motion sensors up that the exterior doors were perimeter secured. Get a call from the security company, active alarm. I'm still near the area because I'd stopped at a shop. And so then this cameras, there's only 2 cameras on the outside and they're set to motion. And I call my production manager, he pulls up apps because I don't have it, and he catches one freeze frame of a black car speeding off the site.
Okay.
And when we get to the site, police are just showing up, and it's Officer EJ Parks and a guy named Zach. And EJ gets suspended for a year within a couple of weeks of this. But they show up at the site, and then they tell me that they arrived late because they were told that they had to keep their police cruisers on that particular shift parked in City Hall garage. And they told me that they had to work from home. So they had to run to the garage, unlock it, get their cruisers out, and get over to the site.
What?
And I said, is that normal? And they said, no, only this shift for like the last month or two, something like that.
That's
And so they start searching the site with me. I go in with Zach. EJ stands out, gives cover. And there's this red pickup that pulls up that EJ doesn't know, pulls about 300-400 feet off his shoulder and sits on the edge of our property and just watches. And EJ said afterwards he was getting really nervous, and he said, you know, as soon as we radioed all clear in the building, then he said I turned to the car and the car did a 180 donut and just sped off at full speed.
interesting.
So then they start looking at me and I look at them and I go, you guys know what's going on here? And they say, well, everyone's talking about what you were up to yesterday. And so, you know, I didn't realize it, but Agent Zachmeyer insisted on taking me and Brown out to lunch. He may as well have just outed me. And so, you know, small town, and he's pointing out people he arrests, and I'm sitting with a guy with an Air Force jacket who's just as recognizable
Sure.
as could be. And they spend the whole day outside my facility, and everybody already knows there's issues. Because one of the things that had happened was the local police chief was Bill Tuttle's nephew.
Gotcha.
And I later find out that day. So EJ and Zach tell me, no, we're not even supposed to talk to you. And I say, what do you mean? And they say, we were given instructions by the local police commission, which at the time, I believe was Chuck Amiot, Chris Strong, and Randy Vivier. And they said, we're not supposed to talk to you. We're not supposed to do anything with your site. And they said, we'll feel like we'll be fired
Wow.
if we do.
One note
So
of context,
I'm
Bill Tuttle, you'll learn a lot more about him if you listen to episode 1. There's a lot that's covered about him. So if that name is new to you, then reference that episode. But he was heavily involved with Benchmark and Chiptronics.
Yep.
He was involved with Bench and Chiptronics, and I'm not 100% positive. When they said not to work with me, I don't think it was more about the scheme as much as when Bill was fired, the stories he told people. And I want to put a clarification there. I'm not exactly sure. I know a large swath of the community knew about the flight sensor scheme, and I'll later talk about why. So people knew about it, but it was kind of like the running town joke almost that Benchmark can't make their stuff, we fix it
Gotcha.
for them. And so I don't know how many people that was the motive to protect that scheme and keep it going, as much as defending Bill, because Bill was saying that he'd been mistreated and in fact he'd been stealing huge amounts of things from us and was using a fictitious shell company to run $15,000 flight sensor through our site as if we made it, and using people in the town and writing checks to a bank account connected to our address. So that's what was going on. How many people knew that part? I really can't tell you. But so we're now on the 17th, and these officers are telling me that they might be fired for talking to me.
Wow.
And sure enough, they're both gone within a few weeks.
Wow.
And it's a while till I even know what happened. So the whole thing unsettles me so much that I call Craig as quick as I can, as soon as they start talking. And I say, hey, what should I tell them? And there's a break-in, and what are you going to do? And he says, hang tight, call me if it happens again, and hangs up.
So
Wait.
before if there's a break-in, then
The site's getting locked down.
right. Yeah. And now it's if it happens again.
Getting locked down. Hang tight, call me if it happens again. And I've made federal reports with those quotes.
And that was literally the day prior to the break-in.
Yeah. They promised that they would do it. Then there's a break-in. Then he says, hang tight. Then I summarized, there's a whole bunch of strange things going on. Brejo sends an email with me and Craig and Agent Brown and suggests I just destroy it all myself. And he says that seems best to prevent further issues.
Wow. And there's that email is in the document package.
Yep.
It's crazy.
Oh, yeah.
Doesn't sound like the most professional thing to be sent by an investigating official in that situation, to say the least.
Well, and he wouldn't identify what he was telling me to destroy.
He wouldn't even be specific.
Just said, seems like it's best to destroy the material. I mean, so it's I basically figured out that I was being set up for my own witness tampering and obstruction. I mean, because if I had destroyed that evidence, I could not have proved to unwind myself from the crimes if I get indicted for what happens, because I'm the owner of the property. And all the address work that Benchmark and Tuttle are doing on the flight sensor scheme and who knows what else is being tied to my address.
And what do they say? Possession is 9/10 of the law?
People go to jail for stuff like that. I mean, I can show you the Minot uniform scandal. We talked about that. I can show you other fraud. People go to jail when they screw up government contracts
100%.
like this. And not only that, they're using a product in commercial aviation as well that's a flight control sensor, and it's lost all traceability. So, I mean, if that all is violating and heaping up on my address, the criminal implication is tremendous. Right. And I'm smart enough at that point to figure some of that out.
This is when you're starting to put the pieces together that there might be something bigger going on than you initially thought.
Because now I'm starting to think that those checks that we found on Bill's desk might be real flight sensor work and not fake flight sensor work. And so I'm getting concerned. So then I have a longer discussion with EJ on the Monday, I believe the 19th. Dave Lehman starts trying to convince me that I need to change towns. And there's emails where Lehman and Teagan and trying to remember who else was on that meeting, I think 2 others, they're set up a meeting that day and send me a meeting invite. And we have a discussion about moving me to the closing Pembina bus coach site or moving me to Dickinson or something like that. They don't have a plan for how they'll compensate me financially to leave, but they're saying, the local issues and the community stuff, it could all be too much. And Dave had the seed planted in my head. So I'm starting to think, yeah, maybe we need this because I don't know what's going on here and I'm kind of
Yeah,
scared.
he's starting to plant those
Dave
seeds into your
knew
head that it would be
exactly.
a good time for you to transition and try to move out and just drop all of this thing and try and forget it kind of thing.
Yeah. And I was saying, who's going to take the title to the property? Who's going to clean the property? Because I don't want to be responsible for transferring this
Someone else.
to
Yeah.
someone else. And I can't have it myself, can't own it. And there's so many federal crimes tied up in what was there that, no one has a plan for how they're going to pay me back or who's going to be responsible for cleaning and transferring the site. And so fast forward to Tuesday, Bill's nephew, the police chief, threatens me for asking more questions, says, you just need to stop looking into all this, and hangs up. I find out from EJ that the chief never logged an investigation into Tuttle when Zachmeyer got introduced. He just said he made a site visit to Hoefer Group. So then we're starting to get really confused and concerned. We meet with the postmaster of Dunseith the next day, myself and my production manager, and we're missing a vendor rebate of close to
Oh, wow.
$500. And we knew it was supposed to be in our mail weeks ago, and we know there's these checks. And so then we also found a Lindy Gas collection ticket. Bill had used the entities TMC and Chiptronics, which were both non-existent
By that point.
entities, and had Lindy Gas come and pick up a lot of equipment of cylinders off the site. And I didn't know it till we found the paperwork on his desk. And so Lindy Gas told me that he settled a debt with them and they picked up our equipment, and they profusely apologized. And they said, we've been billing you. We've been sending you bills. I said, what do you mean you've been sending me bills? I said, that company isn't mine. Well, they said, we use the site's address.
Oh,
And I said, well, what do you mean? They said, the post office gave us a handwritten letter and returned the bill and said to change the address to Bill's personal P.O. box. And so the post office was sifting my mail in Dunseith, and that's how we knew something's up. So then we asked Miss G, the postmaster, and she's sitting with a longtime postal worker, and we say, Misty, we're pretty sure that there was a rebate that was pulled out of our mailbox and given to Bill Tuttle. And she confirmed it.
oh,
And we said, and there's suspicion of ours that we're not in full control of our mail. And then she tells us that every week they pull out things that are labeled to TMC and Chiptronics and quote other businesses that don't belong to you and give it to the rightful owner. So basically, she's admitting to us that they allow Bill and Benchmark to continue operating a business out of both our P.O. box and our physical address. And then she says, if you don't like it, I'll just mark all your mail return to
Wow.
sender.
oh. So instead of fixing the problem and giving you all the mail that goes to your address and letting you try to solve that problem, she says, I'm just going to tell everyone that sends you mail to take it back.
Take it back. So then we report this to Daniel Brejo,
Makes sense.
who says, have you destroyed the stuff yet? And we say, no. And he goes, what? And he starts yelling at us. My boss says to destroy. That's an order. And Chris and I are starting to tremble. And then we're like,
Was
what
this
is
in
going
person or
on?
over the phone, this interaction with Brejo? Okay.
Over the phone, we
Okay.
call him and we say, Daniel, we think the shipments are still going on. And, we had this break in, and I've been threatened by the police chief. The locals say something's going on. What's going on here? Like the local police actually thought that people in the town that were high up probably coordinated the effort to break into the site because the car that sped off the site was traced to someone who worked for the
Wow.
tribe. And so, but no one would talk to him, no one would interview him, no one would find out why he was there, and no one would find out why a door on the south side of our building suddenly appeared like it had been pried open. And so it was, he calms down after like 10 minutes of this back and forth where we're really concerned. And then he says, look, I don't have any jurisdiction, but I can be a resource for you guys.
That's
And me and Chris look at each other and like, you don't have any jurisdiction. This is what starts running through our head, but you're demanding that we destroy the
Right.
evidence.
And then a
So
complete change of pace to try to help you again.
yeah, I mean, that like just short circuited both of us. But then he starts saying, you know, Craig has the cases. Air Force is on this as soon as you can prove, you know, the shipments and stuff. But right now, there's no case. And I told you, you're not under investigation. And he says, so, you know, he said, if you're not happy with Craig, call the FBI. And he said, if you need, you know, to ask questions, just call me and I can help you with questions. And this is like the last 10 minutes of the
Right.
call. And so he really starts to play nice. And we hang up. And then a former city official sits down for 2 hours the next morning with Chris and I and tells us everything that he knew for the first 3 years after the site closed. And suddenly we learn about this, you know, sometimes multi-thousand unit a month operation of rework running for Benchmark, that the city was working with Bill to find money from the state, and that Bill was always shorting the city and always missing on his promises. And the city was really mad, turned off all the machinery at the end of the 2016, but that Bill's kept on doing this project. And then we hear that there's a lot of overseas shipments, 2 years to Ukraine, and then after that, China. And so, you know, we had already found the Chinese record. We never found any Ukraine records. But this all starts to concern us, as you might imagine.
Completely
right? I
understandably
mean, we're
so.
eyebrows going up. We're in a total panic. And he identifies the name of a government source inspector, James Burcham, who was from the town, who had been overseeing for what's called NADCAP, which is a government program for aerospace and defense. He was overseeing the source inspection for the self-release status of that facility under Benchmark. And then he was working in Rochester, Minnesota for Benchmark till 2019. And he was given a white van and was driving back and forth with defective parts, having Tuttle's rework team fix them. And we were told whenever a run of up to a few thousand cans would fail, then they would do this. So we put all this in an email, the whole report, along with what the post office did, what the local police did. We give it to Brown, Zachmeyer, and Brejo, and we say, we found active ITAR in Dunseith, and we've lost control of our address, and we need help because, you know, we are unable to even basically enjoy ownership of our own property until this is all dealt with and resolved. And no one replies.
Oh,
Then I send text messages that day on the 22nd to Agent Zachmeyer and say, you walked off with real ITAR serial numbers in that box of stuff you took, and he never replies. And so some of the things in his boxes were actual rework logs that I later found out were initialed by workers, some of who Bill had hired to work for me. And then they were dated oftentimes, and they ran the serialization sequence of the GG 1320 digital ring laser gyro program for Honeywell. And so that was some of the stuff Craig walked off with. I think they thought
these logs they had in those boxes would have effectively proved work being done actively at that time, because it
oh yeah, they would have proved work. Well, and the checks
exactly.
that were found showed work being done after we bought the site. And then we knew our security system was compromised and 70% of the building could be entered, including 3 exterior doors, without our knowing it. And that's why we had to spend, exorbitant amounts of money rebuilding the security system. And then once we knew what was on site that we had to protect, we put like motion around the whole exterior of the building and went the extra mile on the inside and outside on everything, with multiple redundant servers. And later on, even some of that got hacked. So yeah, we're on the 22nd. And I mean, we're still just in September.
It's been a week or so.
I told you guys that I'm going to have to abridge some of this because otherwise it's going to be a 6-hour podcast.
So yeah, we're in the end of September now, and you're having 2022. You're having issues with the 3 lead agents that have been assigned to you.
I call a family member, and I'm in a panic because, you know, I've been threatened. I've lost control of my address. State commerce guys are telling me they'll help me all they can. You know, talking a lot about getting me with the attorney general.
But nothing's proceeded. But at that
What's
point,
that?
nothing had proceeded.
Commerce.
Yeah.
Oh, not yet. But you see, I was told that Agent Zachmeyer was representing the Attorney
Okay.
General. And so, he's a top BCI agent. Attorney General's under Drew Wrigley, so I figure I'm in good hands. But now it's starting to get weird. And I get really scared and call family, and a family member says, you have a second cousin in the Pentagon. Well, I didn't know that. And so Brigadier General at the time, Stacy Joe Hoosier, who's now a two-star general, was my second
Person
cousin.
to know,
And I
theoretically.
never met her before.
Good person
What's
to know,
that?
theoretically.
Yeah, big family on my mom's side of the family. And so, she's working in the Pentagon, and I'm excited, like maybe she can help. So, family member has a call with her. She says she's open to talking to me. She gets on the phone with me and she says, "Yeah, you've got quite a situation." And I say, "Okay." And so she's Air Force. And I start telling her about my facility and I start telling her what I found. She immediately tells me my life is in danger.
Wow.
And she said, "You need to do what I say from now on." And she said, "You need to call the Minot FBI. I've worked with them." I very quickly realized that from 2015 to 2017, she was commander of the Minot 91st Missile
Interesting.
Wing, which means she's part of the group that didn't close this
Right.
site.
But you don't know that.
So I don't
Yeah,
know
when you're
that
on.
then, but keep in mind, the cover-up has already
Yep.
Right.
began. So it's not like it started with her.
Yep.
I mean, it's just one more person
This is just
who's trying to
another
keep their hand
domino
from
in
getting
line.
burned. So she tells me, "Call mine at FBI and drop her name and say that she sent them," because she said, "I worked with them, they know me." And she said, "You need to report what you've seen, and you need to report that you think that this being, mishandled or covered up or dealt with incorrectly, and that you've started receiving threats." And so I call Minot FBI, and believe it's a Friday morning, September 23rd, and that same day, Shaden Akison emails me, head of investments for commerce, and says, "What do you want me to tell the Attorney General?" And he and I have a discussion, and I tell him I'm in touch with the FBI now. Let's wait a few days, just see what happens first of the week. So Agent Sarah Joyce from your town of Minot, special agent, she talks to me and she very immediately tells me she knows who I am.
Oh,
And then I say, "Okay." And she said, "Yeah, Air Force told me about you. They said they were up there and there wasn't that much to see." And I said, "Oh, really?" I said, "Did they tell you about the missile parts that they left behind and the flight scheme that's running?" And she goes, "What?" And she gets emotional in a hurry. And then she starts exclaiming, "You are not safe." And she said, "Do not respond to another break-in alarm at your site. I'm going to come up there first of the week. I'm going to do some digging." She said, "Tell me the names of who you've interacted with because I think they're all
Wow.
compromised." And I say, "Agent Brejo, Agent Zachmeyer, and Agent Brown at the base." And she goes, "Tell me about Brejo." And I tell her that, he kind of calmed down at the end and insisted that it's not in his jurisdiction. And she goes, "I know Brejo. I trust Brejo. He's a close friend." And she said, "You can talk to him, but don't talk to anyone else." And so she hangs up. Me and the general trade text messages. I later find out that she's overseeing nuclear weapons deliveries to the US government
oh,
at that
geez.
point, because she's doing weapons for the Department of Energy. And she was with three direct reports when I spoke to her. A deputy administrator for nuclear, what is it? The nuclear something administration, and then commander for Stratcom, and the vice chair of the Joint Chiefs for the defense side. Those were her direct reports that she reported to. And so, um, you know, I'm kind of like, she tells me, "I'm glad that the FBI responded." I said, "They said it's quite a
Mhm.
situation." And
Hearing
then,
all of this from a one-star general and a FBI agent the second you meet them has to be incredibly alarming on top of everything you'd already learned at that point.
I'm getting
Yeah,
terrified at this point, and I don't like retelling these parts of the
fair.
story at all. Um, so it got to, and there's tons of documentation supporting all
Without a
of
doubt.
this. I mean, and so the next step then that gets alarming is I call Agent Brejo to thank him. And one of the things that had happened was the night before on the 22nd, myself and the other person that was helping me go through all the evidence that was there for IRS, we actually found about 4 years of shipping logs printed off UPS worldwide shipper reports because the local guy liked to keep his records. And so it was shipments to Benchmark and Lockheed, tons of them, and it was ugly. It was very clear that quantities were listed and that many of them referenced work on the GG1320 sensor.
In theory,
And so that was something FBI.
in theory, these should have been this should have been the smoking gun that allowed BCI and HSI to really come in there and start looking at that
Like
point.
the third or fourth or fifth smoking gun.
You would have thought, yeah, at this point, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we already, with the break-in
That should have been
attempt,
it, yeah.
we should have had the site secured. Then when I get threatened by the police chief and the postmaster, we should have
Yep.
had site secured. And then when I find the shipping logs, we should have had site secured. I mean, my keys should have
You're
been
checking
taken
every
away.
box they told you to have checked to come up there, and any one of those would have happened. They would have been there, and all of these have happened, and they still haven't come and taken your keys.
No. And so I call Brejo to thank him. And the first thing out of his mouth is a really low voice of anger. And I can't go low. I don't have a bass voice, but he says, "You called the FBI?" And he says it in a very slow, drawn out way. And I said, "Yes, Daniel." And then he said it again. And I said, "Yes." And he said it real slow and kind of menacing. And then the next words out of his mouth made me tremble. He goes, "Did you tell the FBI about the local police?" And then at that point, I'm terrified. And I say, "Yes." And then I can't remember the next word. Then it goes into, the next thing is, "What will the FBI care? You just have one guy's testimony." And then I said, "No, Daniel, we found the shipping logs," because he had obviously read the email I had sent the day before. And I hadn't reported that we found the shipping logs yet because we found it after the email was written. And then he asked me twice if I found the shipping logs. And then he told me I should have called Craig in a very low, angry voice and hung up the phone.
This is the same Brejo that the FBI agent Joyce said that she trusted.
Yeah, and the same guy that's now on trial for murder.
Right.
In my
Interesting.
And this is in the evening on a Friday, and I start uncontrollably shaking after he hangs up. And I try to get a hold of my cousin. She tells me, "You just got threatened." And she said, "You need to report that to FBI." And so I spend that evening, was supposed to be celebrating someone's birthday party, and instead I'm trying to get a hold of FBI call centers. And they keep making me tell the whole story and then hanging up on me. And I don't know if someone had already put notes on me or what, but I was telling a very credible set of statements and basically referencing General Hoosier, referencing Sarah Joyce, saying there's already an open inquiry into this. I just need to pass a message. And the message that needs to be passed to Sarah Joyce is that no one is safe. Please pass that message. And they would hang up. And so then the next day, my phone starts acting up for the first time. And I start getting real scared. And I call my cousin and I call the local police. And the police look at some of the things that weren't as secure, like shipping logs and invoices I was keeping. And I was basically saying, this is going to get pried off my cold, dead fingers because I'm going to prove that this happened if they break into my building and try and empty the thing. And so then the local officer responds, and he comes in and kind of panics when he starts to realize the situation. And I know then I had the other person from my factory come, called the general, said, "I've got everyone on the phone and I'm getting real scared now." And the general tries to say to just calm down and wait on the Minot FBI. And I said, "I've been trying the FBI. I'm not getting anywhere." And I just made a comment and I said, I think that there's a flight safety issue because I think that this stuff has been completely out of control and done in unsafe conditions. She says something that catches me completely off guard, and I realize it was almost a veiled threat. She said, I've seen those parts. They are safe.
Oh,
Yeah.
like if there is something going on,
And
don't worry about where those parts might be going or what might have happened to them. Worry about what's affecting you right now, kind of thing.
yeah. And
Does that,
so we
sorry to interrupt, but does that mean
go
that
ahead.
she was at the site?
No, it means that in final test at Honeywell, she was inspecting them, and I don't know if that was for her current Pentagon role or for her previous Air Force role in Minot or
Mhm.
elsewhere. I'm not sure. I don't want
Yeah.
to
That's
know.
reasonable.
Um, but the statement was concerning and has stuck with me since. And, back then I didn't quite think too much of it because I wasn't reading into what she
Right.
was saying. But then a few days later, it becomes more clear because I get terrorized and abandoned. So the next day, I get three stalkers. I'm with my family at the park, and this guy follows us. And I know I'm being followed. He's parking behind my car. He's being suspicious. And then I lift up my phone like I'm going to take a picture, and he hits the accelerator really hard. And so then I tell my wife, I say, I bet we're going to find him at the house. I say, just look normal. We're about 200 feet away from where he was. And he speeds away, drives slow again. And then he was in leather jacket and dark sunglasses, and it wasn't cold. And so then the we get in the car, and this is Sunday, the 25th, and we drive and we go towards my house. And as we get near the house, we see that he's turned from behind the back alley, circled our residence, and he's coming down the street. And then when he sees us approach him, he stops in the middle of the road. And we get a picture of his plate and speed off because we're terrified. And then we have two more people follow us. And then one of them was photographing me outside my residence. And when I tried to run out to get a picture of him, he reversed and sped away. And he was driving a beat up old red Jeep with a white pressed dress shirt and a black tie. And the guy that we ran the plate on, I've got the photograph to prove that this is the
Hmm.
plate we ran. I won't say the name of the plate, um, but we ran it, and it pulls up to a grass plot of land outside of Bismarck with a guy whose name, when you do an Intellius records search, says try another
So it
name,
doesn't even show up in the
and
database.
where his driver's license had neither been renewed nor updated in over 10
Wow.
years. Um, so now several officers tell me I need to start staying home, and they're going to help me figure things out. They start telling me how to get security systems up, how to protect myself, how to watch my movements, things like that. And four officers agreed to start doing nighttime patrols in front of my residence, where if they're not called somewhere, they're just parking in front of my
Wow.
place.
So
Um,
these people that were stalking
so
you at
that
that point,
Monday,
they weren't even doing a very good job of concealing it. They were being very blatant and open with it too.
It's like they just didn't care anymore.
it was deliberately
Yeah.
threatening me, is what they were doing.
They wanted you to
And
know that they were
so,
there.
that is a felony under North Dakota law, that when you're stalking with intent to intimidate, the fact that you are stalking already shows intent to intimidate. You don't have to prove
Okay.
it. It's already gets classified as a crime under state code. And so fast forward then the next day, I'm in quite a panic. So by the early morning, I'm already texting my cousin, like before dawn, and yeah, asking her, did you have people follow me just to like keep me safe or something? And then that conversation delves into the weirdest discussion where she says that, this isn't any military stuff, it's civilian stuff, etc.
She starts to deflect the situation
I
almost.
Yeah, and I tell her, I say, I'm pretty sure the state knows more. And I had, from what I heard from laymen, I said, I think that, the state rep who talked about cans, I think that people are concerned about what's going on here. And I'm starting to speculate, it's many months later, like 10, 11 months later, till I actually figure out what I was
Right.
figuring out as far as the state goes, because that's when I got the records. Um, but, as we get through that day on the Monday, she ends the text messages. And then a couple hours later, someone tries to drop off a benchmark box at our doorstep at the factory, marked static
Wow.
sensitive. And it's the custom size of the GG1320 Traveler package, which I was able to identify from someone who
Okay.
knew it. And it had the fake company on it, it had our address on it, and it had secondary drop-off instructions to the downtown bar.
Wow.
And the UPS driver, who I also know who he is, he tried to drive away, and my production manager caught him before he got into his car and said, "What's this? And why did you put it here?" And then the driver said, "Oh, I was just leaving it for Tuttle." But we knew he knew that Tuttle had left us months
Right.
ago.
So
And so it then turned into an awkward discussion where I get put on the phone because I'm at home, and I start asking him questions, and he starts telling me that he takes these packages all over town, bar, school, and post office, wherever Tuttle can be found. Says he's been doing it for several years. And then he says he's just going to take this one to the bar. And I tell him, no, I've got a contact in the FBI now. I want it to go there. And he then kind of panics, said he wants to call Homeland, which I'm thinking probably Brejo. And he then drives away. And we photograph the parcel, we reject it, and he goes
Wow.
away. And so then I call Reed Messman, Minot FBI. I can't remember if it was before or after the package. I believe it was after. And he answers instead of Sarah Joyce. And I later had interaction with him many months later in person twice, and by email several times with my attorney, and by phone with him. And he's left me unsettled many times. But Agent Messman basically blew it off as if, yeah, Air Force has got this one. And when I tried to report Brejo threatening me, he didn't take it seriously, and it scared me. And I then tell Shaden Akison everything that's happened, and I send him some text messages of the package that just arrived. And Shaden gets righteously angry, tells me this isn't right. He said, whatever's going on here, we're going to get to the bottom of it. Don't you worry. I'm going to have you meeting with the Attorney General tomorrow. And meaning Drew Wrigley, not some assistant attorney
so
general. And he said, possibly.
As of
Go ahead.
just about a little over 2 years later, have you met with Attorney General Drew Wrigley to this point?
Drew won't talk to me, and last year his office called me a lunatic.
Just
That's neat.
So then Shaden is very close friends with Josh Teagan, from what I was told by some of his coworkers, that they were like childhood friends or school friends.
convenient.
And so Shaden also was a lawyer before he joined Commerce, and he was always telling me I could trust him because he was a lawyer. So he tells me to put a short write-up of everything that we believe is occurring and what we're discovering. Because now that we've got the package, we know they probably tried to entrap us so that the package would arrive at our door. We would be accused of being part of the scheme, and we would be told, destroy everything, and we won't take further action against you. That's what we figured was probably going on.
Because it's crazy. I have a question. Before that package arrived at your door, had there been a package that had arrived at your door before?
We knew it was odd because that Friday UPS left a sorry, we missed you notice on the door, and we couldn't trace the tracking number. And when you can't trace the tracking numbers, it's often something defense or controlled.
Okay. But
so that was the first time we knew something was potentially up.
Because it's weird that when these things start happening, that then they just there's rapid fire events. If someone breaks into your place, then watch out. Okay, next day someone breaks in.
Well, because what they were trying to do, I think, was when the agents were at the site, I don't think they thought that we had a live security system
Okay.
yet, because I had been telling them that we just ripped out the old one, well, the new old one, like, we ripped out the
Mm-hmm.
old one,
Had the new one.
put in a new one, we ripped out that one, and we started
Yep.
putting up a new one. So I don't think they thought we had security, and I thought they thought they were gonna have all day at
Yeah.
the site. And I thought that, that was the plan. Um, so that's my best
Right.
guess. In terms of finding the shipping logs, I don't think in Brejo's wildest imagination, he would have expected that shipping logs would actually be at the site
Right.
of the defense and aerospace
Yeah.
scheme. Like, I think that
He figured
stumped
they
him
would have either
and made him
they either
really,
wouldn't have existed or they would have already been destroyed by that point.
Or well
yeah,
protected.
no one would be crazy enough to leave that
Sure.
on the site. So what was obvious was there was a clear effort to detach me from my own lawfully owned property for some months, and I was standing up to it, and that was making a lot of people very
Right.
angry. Um, so, it and then I'm gonna circle back to the bloody room discovery and stuff like that, which I'll have to talk
Hmm.
about later, but, I mean, that something happened to the tenant before us that caused them to leave their wallets, cell phones, a more than $200,000 Army vehicle behind, and things like that. So, that's something that happened in 2019 that I think the state knows more about. But I can only speculate
Sure.
as to that. I do have some photographs of some of the things that we discovered connected to that group, and I've also found extensive court dockets that relate to their disappearance and only open the door for more questions. I've also been able to trace some of that group. I can't confirm that all of the shareholders are still
Wow.
alive. So that's the backstory there.
Jeepers.
And so Dave Lehman was working with that
Sure.
group too, uh, and told me that nothing happened after 2015 at the site, just that it was some basic commercial projects, and that group that left because they were just grant hunting shysters. But I later find out they're on their own money, and they weren't getting any money from the state.
Hmm.
Um, and they had an option to purchase the site, a long-term lease, and they were prepaid for 6 more months when they left. Um, so there were
Yeah.
many things about that I also started reporting to agents and saying, "I think that someone's trying to do to me what happened to the group before me, and I don't know who it
Right.
is." Just getting scared. And so Shaden tells me to do a write-up. I send it around 1 in the morning on the 27th, and then send it to Shaden and Josh under Shaden's instruction. And then a couple hours later, mid-morning, I've already lost access to my email at that point. My email server starts saying it's malformed, and I start texting Shaden, not even realizing that Josh has already unilaterally frozen my state
Oh,
funds
really?
and told me that if I feel unsafe, I should go call the authorities. And I reported who was threatening me. I attached a photo of a stalker. I reported the different agents who'd been derelicting their duties. I had reported the fact that we're pretty sure we just found a secret defense site where the only place to go to get the cans done is here, and they don't know how else to do it, and they want to detach me from my property. I didn't know at the time that Commerce had about 4 years of records validating that email. They would allege that week that the reason they froze my loans is because they thought I went crazy, but actually they froze my loans because I discovered the crime they were associated
Right.
with.
So what month did they freeze your loans in?
Multiple times,
The
but
first time.
starting on the 27th of September 2022, just a few months after they started
Hmm.
my loans and after only a small fraction of it had been
Right.
dispersed.
So you essentially
Because they gave me a subordinated working capital
okay.
credit line, and I spend money so frugally that I was only gonna touch it when I needed it because I didn't wanna pay the
Right.
interest.
Reasonable.
It's fair. You
Yeah.
basically didn't have it long enough to actually like default on your loan.
No, I never defaulted until they defaulted me unilaterally, and I was in perfect
Right.
standing, and I still had 3 more years of term available,
Jeepers.
That's crazy.
That's
and that was this year. So, when I, in the morning, had my, phone, was starting to get funny, it was starting to go intermittent on the 27th of September 2022. I was sending texts to Shaden, who had been nonstop assisting me since August. And then all of a sudden he texts me and says, "Hey, I'm with Josh right now. I'm really busy. Have to like get in touch with you later or something." I've got the text chain preserved. And then I open up the email, I finally get in, and it's probably early afternoon, and I realize that Josh has frozen my loans. And then, I mean, the question starts running through my head, how can Josh freeze my loans? Because Josh is the Commissioner of Commerce. My loans are under North Dakota Development Fund, Inc. The executives of that fund are Shade Nakeson and Jessica Took, who are the signatories to my loans. How does Josh have the unilateral authority to issue a
And on top
freeze?
of that, no one even
And
told you beforehand that it was going to happen, correct?
well, it just was a shot over the bow. I mean, they were helping me. And then Josh said, until this situation resolves itself, he's freezing loans. So I pretty much find out once that happens, the local officers tell me that Agent Zachmeyer has a reputation. And they say the reputation is that he cleans up messes for the attorney general and the governor's offices. And so they say you're probably being subjected to one of those cover-ups. And so, they freeze my loans and they know exactly what they're doing and they know exactly what I found. And they don't want anyone else knowing. And they think that he's been threatened, he's been stalked, he's been harassed. This guy's gone. The other thing that happened on Monday, the 26th, I forgot to mention, is all my bank cards got frozen. Credit and debit cards with all my bank accounts.
Just randomly.
And they were flagged for fraud in my hometown of Bottineau.
The place that at this point you'd resided for months.
Yes.
Yeah.
Long time. And now my credit and debit cards are flagged for fraud, and the card companies can't get them unblocked. And some of the cards have to be thrown away and reordered. So there was that. I mean, everything was panicking me. And I think that they thought if we turn up enough heat, we're just going to pressure cook this guy and he's just going to take off. And then when he takes off, we can empty his building. And then he comes back and we've gaslit him and he'll never be able to tell anyone what happened.
Suppose that's true. What would be the motivation or the incentive for them to get rid of you so they could clean out the building rather than just cleaning out the building while you were there?
Because anyone who's been associated with this mess is probably already responsible for having murdered people in aerospace. In addition to that, you've got chargeable offenses for huge prison terms for if they can trace the serial numbers, $200 to $300 million of direct fraud. If they can't, over $1 billion. The amount of crimes tied to this and the people it ties to, which we've talked about in previous episodes. I mean, you've got representatives for both Kramer and Hoeven. You've got, cabinet level people for Burgum. You've got tons of commerce people that were involved in these projects at this site. And you've got locals that will attest that when the building was negotiated for transfer from Benchmark to the city of Dunseith, that the city was just a paper beneficiary and the state was agreeing to take on the compliance roles with Benchmark. So basically, they've all been caught and they don't want to be caught and they don't want to be responsible for whatever happens next. And they might already know what happened to the group before me at that same property.
Wow.
So those are the things that I think are being covered up at that point. One of the reasons I know it was covered up is because for many, many months after, parcels started routinely coming in and different UPS drivers were quitting. And finally, UPS apologized to us and they were showing us the parcels. And they were being marked off to the downtown bar. There were controlled supplier components, different tactics and maneuvers to get the parts in, which Benchmark's attorney, lead outside counsel, later acknowledged was actually occurring.
Wow.
Not that she didn't acknowledge that they were being diverted, but she acknowledged that they were using our address and sending stuff into the community of the GG1320 parts in 2023 and had lost track of our address. And the Minot Air Force Base knew about it. The North Dakota National Guard knew about it. North Dakota VCI knew about it. And Minot FPI knew about it. HSI knew about it. Everybody in North Dakota that was running a 3-letter agency knew about it.
Or at least someone there
And
did. Mm-hmm.
yeah. And so, I mean, someone in those agencies mostly coalesced around Minot, but also the Attorney General's office. And the Attorney General's office, because I had called the AG line, they knew who I was, and they got me to Casey. And, then Casey makes Craig call me about the missile stuff. They all knew what was there. Got a long recording, which I'm going to include in the upload, of a call with Agent Zachmeyer months later when he misleads the IRS. And he recalls in his memory, the only time he's recalled, that yes, some of these things as I reported them and what I found were true, and there were federal failures. And he tries to distance himself from it all. But basically, what happens next is all the agents go cold. They ignore me completely. I'm in a panic, and I know if I leave, my site's going to get broken into, but the shipments may continue, and then everything could still be pinned on me. So I'm thinking, how do I stay and how do I do this? And I start searching the internet, calling every attorney that I can find that looks like they've got aerospace or complex litigation with regards to government. I start trying to find anybody I can report to because, people keep saying State Department. And I look it up, and State Department regulates international traffic in arms and the Arms Export Control Act. And we had both of those things there. And the AECA, Arms Export Control, is the President's Act. So it's an act that's at the discretion of the US president. So, I know that stuff's there. I don't know what else is there. And I find I won't say how I found it, but I found the phone number of the head of compliance for the United States State Department for Arms Control. And I call him, and in DC, he answers by the grace of God. And this is on the 29th of September. First thing he says is, "How did you get my number?" Which I then explain how. And I said, "Look, I got to tell you who I am so that you can see that I'm a credible person before I tell you what's going on." Give him my background for a couple of minutes, tell him about this factory, tell him what the factory used to do, and tell him, here's what I found. And he starts telling me, everything you're telling me is disturbing. And this is John Foster. And then he says, I think you're being subjected to witness tampering and a political cover-up, and you report to me from now on. And he told me that Agent Brejo did not call the State Department because if he had, he said, I would have known about this issue. So he told me, and he emailed me Julia Tolino's email address as well. And Julia Tolino is a law enforcement political attaché for the State Department. They were both political attachés. So, we're starting to get high up in the political side in the US government. So, it's, he says to put a report together, and then I get a phone call, believe it was that day or the next day, from a DC attorney named Jack Horan, Horan, John G. Horan. And I had left a call to his voicemail, but my phone was basically not working, and I was having to use another phone. And I tried to set up a burner phone, and that phone immediately corrupted its SIM card, and things were just weird. And so one of the phones was like pinging. And so I wasn't sure if I was really talking to Jack Horan. I was, concerned at first, but he gave me background, and I was like, okay, this is legit. And he sends me an email from his law firm, and he arranges for legal services and says, I can help you fix this.
Right.
He's an aerospace fraud expert, former DC prosecutor. He's general counsel of the Government Contracts Association. He's vice chair of the American Bar Association's Government Contracts Fraud Division. I mean, the guy's got
in theory,
resume.
this should be right up his alley.
Yeah, and we talk names like Benchmark and Honeywell. He tells me Honeywell's not an issue. He says he's got to run a conflict check on Benchmark because he said that the stuff that's, if it's got Honeywell's name on it, he said, who's really responsible? And I said, well, Chiptronics and Benchmark were these names. And I did not know, and I now know later that he knew, but anybody in the aerospace industry knows that the final contractor to government and anyone up the chain is responsible for anyone down the chain. So all the crimes would have been responsible to Boeing, Airbus, and Lockheed for any serial numbers they took, and then to Honeywell for everything they distributed. So the short version is he dictates an email for me to send with him on copy to John Foster, says he's going to help me get the site cleaned up, spends the next roughly 6 weeks trying to convince me to write a half-hearted disclosure to the State Department and throw everything away.
Wow. Just dump it, right? Just throw it all in the dumpster.
Tells me, you tell them, you say, I'm an RV manufacturer. You have 30 days to come pick it up. If you don't, it's going in the local.
That's the second time you've been told to do something essentially like that.
Yeah. And I start questioning him that I don't think I should do that. I don't think that's
Right.
legal. I think
Feels a little threatening to do that.
Yeah. He says it's the worst aerospace fraud I've ever heard of. And he said, I've had CEOs go to jail for selling a bad bolt to the military for a tank. He said, what you found is crazy. And he tells me then, I finally tell him, look, I'm pretty sure I know what all this is. And then he says he wants to speak to a program expert, and he does. And he has a very kind of somber tone to the phone call, and this is probably end of November. He calls me kind of like late in the first week in December or early in the second week, and he tells me, you should know I work for Honeywell.
So the attorney that says this client, you being the client, has evidence of this major fraud, and rather than advocating for the client,
over $1 billion, and he told me it was over $1 billion.
He says
so you got the number from him.
Rather than saying, okay, I'm going to go defend or help this client, says, just throw it all away. Let's act like it doesn't happen. And then you find out
he works for Honeywell.
He has connections to the side that potentially
would
used
hold
to access or would hold access.
Then he tells me, I've been talking about you with Honeywell's senior executives. And he said, I need to know, do you think Honeywell's involved? He said, I want you to think about it. And I want you to email me what you think. So like a week later,
do you give him any money?
I tell him.
So he broke attorney-client privilege?
He's taking my money with conflict of interest, and he's going to the person who's potentially on the hook for the crimes, and he's trying to craft a solution.
He's talking to them about you and the business you had done.
Under
and
retainer.
He's a top guy in the American Bar Association.
So he broke attorney-client privilege? Or, I mean,
allegedly.
Speculatively.
No, he broke ethics law. I mean, he broke all kinds of stuff. I mean, it's awful what he did, and it gets worse. So
go ahead, keep going.
Then I email him and I say, Jack, you wanted to know if I think Honeywell's involved or what they know. I said, here's the thing. If Honeywell knows, they have a problem. If they didn't know, they have a problem. And I left the email.
Regardless.
And he calls me on December 29 from a beach in Miami. And he tells me, as of right now, I'm effectively withdrawn as your counsel. Then he says, I thought Honeywell's senior guys were going to clean this one up for you, but they'll never admit it. He said, this is the worst thing that's ever been found. And he said, they are very mad at you. And he said, government is very mad at you. And he said, but now that you know what you found, you have to report. I'm effectively withdrawn. If you need help finding someone, let me know. And then he said, I'll refund your money for the last 2 months.
Okay.
And he said, I can't refund the initial payment.
Why
So
not?
then he hangs up. I think that's the last I've ever heard of him. I'm not smart on making call recordings. And then by just kind of a miracle to be able to prove this, about a week later, his secretary bills me from Faegre Drinker Law Firm.
Wow.
And I email the secretary and say, Jack has a conflict of interest, and per the agreement, he said that he's not going to be billing the last 2 billings. And then Jack replies and says, I confirm our agreement, and apologizes for the confusion.
I've seen that email.
We have.
It's real.
That's there's the context to it.
So then Commerce gets back involved. So by now, I forgot to tell you how my loans got put back.
So they got froze end of September.
When the State Department gives me instructions on September 29. I get a message from Jessica Took, text message and a phone call. Says, hey, I want to come up and make sure you're not crazy. Maybe we had a knee-jerk reaction. So you don't think someone was monitoring my communications and found out I spoke to the State Department? So she comes up and she investigates and she tells me, the state really doesn't want to default you because we don't want to own missile parts, and we'll help you do this, and you report to Jack, because she saw the emails of the communications with Jack. Then trades more text messages in October, says it's taking longer than she thought getting my loans put back, calls me, says she got them put back by late October. I'll be able to start taking draws again. Says I need to do my best to run the business, but that she's going to work with me every week. And she puts this in writing to figure out how to head off any problems before they arise, getting things sorted. So then she begins weekly engagement and visits me every probably 3 weeks on average at the site. Um, so, and she has family in the area. And so, that takes us fast forward to
Hmm.
January. We have a long discussion about Jack deceiving us. She says, no, Commerce should have done more. I'm really sorry.
Wow.
And she says, I'm going to talk with Shaden and we're going to see what we can do. And so then Shaden calls me. First time I've spoken to him since that September when they froze my loans, and I panicked and said I need help, and in text messages. And he apologizes for what he called misunderstandings. He said that Jessica represents himself and Josh Teagan. I should do whatever she tells me to do, and I have their full support, and he's going to plan a visit really soon. And then Jessica tells me that they need to get a non disclosure in place because we have all this technology, and that they'll work on one through the attorney general, even though I have a standard one that, I mean, you guys have signed it to see the
Yep.
tech we have on the RV side. It's a pretty boiler industry standard, internationally recognized large corporation tech agreement that just says you won't tell people how we do what we do with our technology and product. And so for whatever reason, they said I needed to sign one that came through the AG's office. And then Dave Lehman and Shane Nakeson, by the end of July, start working with Dean Duplantis, Assistant Attorney General for the Drew Wrigley office. And he is a pretty high up assistant attorney who looks like he used to have a military background and a nuclear background as well.
Convenient.
And he wanted me to sign a gag order covering the entire state of North Dakota. And it was a mutual non-disclosure agreement that contained zero technology provisions that would be enforceable for my company whatsoever, and had a clause in paragraph 12 that said that I can't make any disclosure to any third party regarding the basically the relationship even with the parties. I mean, it was the broadest hush clause that you could possibly imagine. And then it said the state of North Dakota on behalf of the Department of Commerce. So they were encapsulating the attorney general, they were encapsulating all their different departments under what was supposedly a commerce tech NDA to visit my site. I refused to sign it, and they started canceling visits. And so then Jessica, who signed our individual NDA, came, and then finally Dave signed it too. And in April, he wanted to see all the tech. I think it was late April. He was having lunch with me when I got a call from my attorney that the FAA called. Um, of course, he never told me what he knew. And so Jessica tells me to hire a new attorney, helps me with the attorney, gives us authorization to divert as much funding as necessary to prepare reports for State Department, which also go to the Department of Transportation Crimes Unit.
Hmm.
And we then put together like a huge, I don't know, probably 80 plus page report, something like that, that details everything that's there, because John Foster said, if you want us to take action from DC, we have to know everything you know. And so I was consulting different program experts. I was, by now I'm starting to become pretty smart on
Yep.
this stuff. And then in the second page of the report, we have a whole paragraph that acknowledges a thanks that without the Department of Commerce, this report wouldn't have been possible. And their close support and their, restructuring of
Thanks to
financial
them.
latitudes to allow us to get all this done, which they have since denied. And I have so many records, which we
Hmm.
will share, of them directing our remediation, including audio with FBI and FAA. So needless to say, we send the report on about March 8th of 23 and quickly get a response from the State Department that they're working on triage with the 3 heads of enforcement for the State Department, and that they're keeping it close hold and only notifying certain persons. So that's coming from the US State Department Arms Control. And then that week after we send it, on about the 15th of March, I get a call out of the blue from Agent Zach Meyer.
And you hadn't spoken to him in months at this point.
No, and I'm
Yeah.
terrified of him. And when he calls me, I'm shaking. And I say, "Do you mind if I get my attorney on the phone?" And he says, "No." And we record the call. And we do it lawfully, meaning we followed the law in doing it. And so he speaks to us for, I think it's a total of maybe close to 31 minutes or something like that. I've got about a 23-minute segment that skips all the introductions
Right,
and personal
sure.
details of us that I'm going to upload with the evidence in full. He basically tells us the IRS wants to come pick up the site and wants to get all those false invoices.
Of all the agencies to pick
And I
up
tell him,
the
"Craig,
site, why?
you know that this is real." And then he says, "Yeah," and he confirms that it's real, but then tries to allege it's fake again later in the call, or false. He also says that it's super secret base stuff, and he understands that he can't do anything about it. He confirms that it's GG 1320 flight sensors. And then I say, "It looks to me like the base just had a close-up responsibility that they goofed," and he said, "I'm probably right." And then I ask him why, when Brejo threatened me, he never did anything, and he couldn't provide an answer. He said, "I don't know what to tell you on that." And he starts telling us about the IRS, starts telling us that he's investigating the local guy for theft, and the IRS is going after Chiptronics for the laundering of money. And he says, he's doing the best he can for what it is. He knows I might not believe that, calls it a bunch of federal failures, talks about the missile schematic, says that the guy goes from Air Force goes, "Oh," and lets out an expletive when he realized what we found. And I tell him I know some of those parts that they lawfully had to be collected. And I say that there's people from DC who become very interested, and you can hear him let out a long huff on the phone when I say that. And so a couple days later, when IRS shows up, we tipped him off it might be a little bit of a funny encounter. And it turns out that not only were they sent by Craig, who said he wasn't working with the base anymore, they were also sent by Gene Brown. And they were told to come pick up the fake records. And so they were misled, which is also obstruction of justice, by agents, which, as I understand, in the colloquial terms of law enforcement, is called like a giglio, where basically once you've lied, then all your other casework and things can start to come back
Oh, wow.
under review. So, they lied. And the IRS guys were furious. One with a top secret clearance who was ex-military thought that his clearance could be revoked for being uh, in witness of the componentry. And so they told us they were going straight to DOJ if we had any more issues. And then a week or two later, the State Department told us not to contact them again without cleaning up the missile parts. Told my attorney, craziest thing they've seen in 5 years, but either Air Force or HSI, Homeland Security, should do something about it. And he said John Foster wouldn't talk to me because he told my attorney different stories. And he told my attorney that it's, not his bailiwick. And he said it so many times, my attorney thought he had a medical condition. And so, it was, I then emailed him a very sternly worded email of facts. These are all the things we found. This is what you told me to do, et cetera, et cetera. He acknowledged my email and said I need not contact him again. So at that point, I tell Jessica, I've got a national media group lined up that wants to send people in to verify that what I found is what I found. And then they said they're going to break it national. And Jessica tells me if you do that, the state, either the attorney general, the governor's office, or Josh will freeze your loans again and make sure that you're not.
Was that part of the contract mortgage that you agreed to?
I think that was in the like magnifying print at the bottom of the contract, probably, that you have to do everything the state tells you or else they freeze your loans.
Interesting. So if you get a loan with Department of Commerce and they don't like what you do, then they can just freeze your loans.
You're screwed. That's all it boils down to.
Weird.
That's it feels like that's too much. Yeah.
But she promised me more money if I did everything she told me.
So if you go along, not only will they unfreeze your loan, they'll give you more money.
Yep. So she said she knows the law enforcement channels step by step are taking long, but if I do it, they'll unfreeze, or not unfreeze. They'd already unfrozen some of it. They said that they would give me like replenishment for the extra delay. And this is all on recordings. I mean, so my attorney told me, he said, they're very cooperative, but he said, this is so complex that at some point they might not be. And he started coaching me on how to do recordings. And some of my earliest recordings were garbage because I didn't know how to do it right. But then I got better.
You understand that concept.
So
Kyler, you're something else. So you're saying that the Department of Commerce would, if they didn't like who you did business with, if you had a supplier that they didn't like or whatever, that they would have
no, not that far, but it was that if I didn't clean up the site their way, and if I told media what was at my site, they were going to freeze my loans.
But I'm saying theoretically they would have the right to freeze your own loan.
Theoretically, they did not respect any terms or clauses in their contracts. I mean, theoretically, they extorted me, but that's not theoretically. That's actually, they extorted me. So, they broke laws is what it boils down to. I mean, could they have just simply defaulted the agreement? Well, no, because there's a related document that gave me a guaranteed term period. So
that's why they had to find this runaround into freezing your loans at this point.
That's why they started accusing me of misusing funds once I found the public records. So, so we are, and keep in mind, this whole time I've got like 10 employees and we're cramming, trying to tear out the site while coordinating with federal authorities on what we can and can't touch. And so it's a scary mess because I have to keep foreigners off the site.
Yeah.
And that's a whole chunk of our planning because we were working on a project with Canada.
Gotcha.
Canadians were furious when they found out what had actually gone on there and that they had physically been on the site, Canadian officials. And I was following a written instruction from Brejo, who I later found out was just trapping me the whole time. So, it goes into, then I tell Jessica, well, what else am I supposed to do? How do I get this stuff cleaned up? Because the authorities are just punting to each other. No one wants to pick this up federally. And then Jessica suggests, I'm like, I wasn't even saying it seriously. I said, the only other way to get their attention is you file a lawsuit, create a public record, and they have to acknowledge it. And then she quickly goes, yes. And I'm like,
wait, what?
I mean, then she says, we'll support a lawsuit, but we won't support media.
Wait.
And so Jessica instructs me to sue Benchmark and Tuttle, who are doing business with, in recent years, with the chairman of the North Dakota Development Fund, Jim Albrecht.
It's crazy.
Oh,
so I have another question. Have you seen the files that Dustin Galro got from the state?
Yeah. I've gone through them in quite a bit
of detail.
Any
of the correspondence that was in that?
They're hiding. Several hundred records are being hidden.
Okay, they haven't been released yet.
There's records in there, which I'll talk about in a moment, where their setup on me and their attempt to take over my company is obvious if you know the missing records.
Sure.
So they released only the non-obvious things to the casual observer, very deliberately.
So basically the point of me bringing that up was you did not see any correspondence in that file pack relating to some of the events that we're talking about right now.
They hid everything. And not all of it even required a lick of redaction. They could have unloaded chunks of it without any concern.
Interesting.
So I'm unloading it, and I'm going to make sure everybody gets to see what really happened. So I can kind of fast forward now to where, we do the lawsuit. The lawsuit.
To clarify,
we still don't.
When you say lawsuit, you're talking about the lawsuit against Tuttle. That one.
We file a lawsuit against Benchmark. and multiple John Does. And Jessica agrees with us and my attorney. And keep in mind, Jessica's visiting my site with agents. My attorney's flying in and meeting with Jessica. Jessica's giving us instructions. Like, this is being done, not just like, oh, yeah, you could do that. Like, Jessica's guiding us through how the state wants it
Wow.
done, telling us that she's working for Josh. And Shaden's telling me she's working for Josh.
So they are with you step by step
So
through this process.
step by step, and they tell us to initiate a lawsuit, which is going to implicate them as a defendant.
Interesting.
And I don't know that
Okay.
yet.
Okay.
So we are basically putting the whole thing together. We do a lot of work on it. And I tell her, I say, Jessica, I found a couple of records on the site that show that public officials did something here. I said, I'm afraid there's more, and I'm thinking about putting in a FOIA. Well, guess what? Her response was, don't put in a written FOIA. If you put in a
We're
written
going to freeze your
FOIA,
loans.
what do you guys think
Them
will happen?
loans
Yep, they'll
They'll be
freeze
as
your
cold as
loans.
winter.
And she literally said that, but she said, don't worry, I've got another way. So she drives to the site with a state computer, and she opens it up and she key searches TMC, Chiptronics, Tuttle, Benchmark. Every record after mid-2013 from Commerce has no records whatsoever. She's hiding over 4 years of records.
Oh.
So, or the state,
Somebody
is hiding and has somebody has parsed out the database because the records exist, because I found parallel copies through a regional group that was in the meetings, and I have state emails with Commerce. So the process, then I get a physical threat against my life. It's coming from within Tuttle's camp in the school system, that if I go speak at an event, I'm going to be physically attacked and accosted, and they're going to physically remove me from the town because Bill has just gone irate after the lawsuit gets filed. We get the FAA call within about 10 days of the lawsuit being filed, and the national security team from DC gets involved. And keep in mind, this thing was filed very under the radar in Rolette County. We didn't make a press announcement about it. I mean, obviously the feds were monitoring because they knew as soon as it went in. And we disclosed public safety risks, and we disclosed missile parts at the site. So we named Tuttle because we knew Benchmark would name him, and that would drag out the process of trying to come up with a resolution in the suit. So we agreed with Jessica that he would be named to consolidate and speed up the process. Then we had about a dozen names connected into the scheme, many that we could prove, but some of them not enough to name them, or it just wasn't practical to name them. So we tried to keep the suit very streamlined, very focused on Benchmark. And ultimately in August of 23, there was a 100 and some page amended complaint that went into all the details, including supporting data from the public records that we found, because we had to use it to show it was, game check match with Benchmark. And so Benchmark was initially really obstinate and, basically levied accusations, but did not deny the GG 1320 program was operating in Dunseith since 2016. We had too much evidence to prove it. They tried to allege that it was just a metal part when we told them we found electronic stuff, and oh, by the way, authorities are starting to visit our site. Then they kind of panicked with the attorney, and the attorney was saying on an audio recording that I'll also include we played it before, where, how can we be in the same league with Tuttle when for years we didn't know where he was? Well, that alone is acknowledging, a federal violation with regards to the movement of controlled defense and aerospace componentry. So, I mean, right there is a huge issue, just by that statement. And so, we're moving towards the how do we get this thing cleaned up? We're making demands that Benchmark clean it up. Then authorities tell us they're going to clean it up. FAA comes to the site, and on May 10th, they come, and Agent Zachmeyer tries to mitigate the threats to Tuttle from Tuttle's camp by telling me I just shouldn't go in the school anymore. And then, Michael Standard.
Just for a little context and clarity there, we don't have to dive into this sidebar very much.
But context is Tuttle's got, by marriage, like a majority of the town. Family controls the school system.
And at that time,
and he lied to everybody about what happened. And so people were very, very, very angry, and he was trying to incite some violence against me, according to two
And at
teachers
that
in the
time, you
school.
were loosely working with the school to get some kind of CTE program set up there.
Directly working with them, I brought the heads of
Okay.
my industry in to promote the first high school, college level training program in the
Mhm.
United States with high pay right out of high school to come join our factory. And it was jointly promoted, and the school and the state made promises, and all of that was broken. The state said, kill the program for your own safety. You can't do it as long as Bill's there. And then the school superintendent tried to investigate me after confirming that the physical threat was made against me, and started telling Commerce that he was looking into me in order to dispel community concerns. But it was just a charade to try and intimidate Commerce and others from assisting us
Of
further.
course.
Um, so that whole program disintegrated at the demand of Commerce. And then we've got an email from Zach Meyer with Jessica took on copy, confirming that the FAA called Zach Meyer. Chad Foster, who is National Security Incident Response Lead for the FAA, called him. And Craig called me afterwards, really proud. And it's about the last time I've ever spoken to him. And he said, yeah, I spoke to Chad Foster. And he said, he asked me, is it all true? And he said, I told him if even 2% of what you're saying is true, they have a major issue with the Federal
Wow.
Aviation Administration.
Do you think 2% is
And
true?
he sounded proud of himself.
Yes.
Like after 6 months of obstruction, he did one thing that was right, and he felt proud and, was sounding off about it. So then he organizes for the FBI to join with the FAA, which I later found out was just a monitoring effort to see how far along we'd come and who all we were reporting to. And you can actually tell that on the recording.
Sure.
The FBI agent Reed Messman showed up, didn't want to be recorded. His knee was shaking. And my attorney said, we've been advised by other federal authorities, we need to record everything from now on. And the FAA, Tim Mahoney, didn't mind being recorded. He wanted to record as well, until I started talking about the bloody scene at the site and the parts going to the
Mhm.
bar. And he asked for recorders to be turned off, and you can hear that on the recording. And then he gets a low voice and he looks at everyone in the room and says, just so you know, I'm bundling all this up against Boeing. He said, this is the most sensitive electronic in commercial aerospace, and it's used in every new Boeing jet, and it's most of our
Who is this
Airbus.
again?
And Tim Mahoney, Senior Safety Inspector for the Federal
Wow.
Aviation Administration. We also worked with Levi Shockley and Tim Bonderer and Chad Foster. So they had a whole team devoted to this, made one trip out, follow-up calls, different emails. Tim just panicked at the site. His face turned white when he saw the missile stuff that we had, and said in an exclaming voice, oh my gosh, the government kills to protect this. I can't believe I'm seeing this. And he wanted to know how it was made, and someone who knew how it was made said, I'm not telling you. And he was an electronics specialist who didn't know how it was made. So at that point, he quickly threw things on his cart that he said, this is for the FAA. He went to the front and said, all I need you to do is prove to me that work was done after Chiptronics legally dissolved. And you see, Chiptronics was a deregistered trademark in 2018. TMC Inc. owner legally dissolved in 2020. We showed him work logs after the dissolution. He took photos of it and said, that's all I need to see. He said, I've never seen that before. And he started the day by telling me, I don't know what the big deal is. You work for Honeywell. I've got the paperwork that you're authorized to do the GG1320 for Honeywell. Well, Honeywell had a multi-month head start to try and figure out how to
work this situation through.
Mislead the FAA on this because of Jack Horan talking to the senior execs. So Honeywell had a head start and tried to convince the FAA that I purchased Chiptronics and I was in the supply chain doing GG1320 work, which would be convenient because then the violations would fall on me. And did I buy Chiptronics? The company was dissolved 2 years before I bought the factory. I didn't even know if there was any existence of an activity. So yeah, I mean, it was crazy. And so then he left saying the same thing the IRS guys said, be careful. And he said, everything you're telling me is true. And then he said, everybody else lied. I'm going back to Honeywell. And so then Reed Messman from FBI Minot came up the next day and told me he knew everything was true since I started talking to him the first time in September trying to report Brejos' threat. And he kind of smiled sheepishly and said, "It's complicated." And I said, "The only complicated thing is that no one wants to do the right thing here." And he suggested, "Why don't you go to media?" Which I told him I can't go to media because the state will freeze my loans, and he didn't seem to care. And I think later, as I mulled that over, I think they were still trying to allege that I was in the supply chain, and if I was, by going to media, I would be disclosing controlled technology under my
Okay.
custody, which could then get indicted and walked
Sure.
away. So I think they were setting me up
They
again.
almost wanted you to go to
Um,
media at that point then.
Yeah, because if I went to media and said there's all this stuff there, and then they say, "No, the paperwork says that that's your stuff, you're in
Yep.
the chain, you've just violated some government agreement," then,
Now
it's
it's on you again. Yep.
basically on me. So then he, goes and he opens up where all the evidence is being quarantined and lets out a breath and says, "Oh, I thought it would be more." And even though it was this whole room full of stuff, and he thought it would be more, which is a more concerning statement of extraordinary negligence and
Yeah.
deprivation of my rights.
Completely.
And that's your Minot-based Reed Messman. So then he starts telling me he'll see what he can do, trades emails with my attorney, says, Air Force says it's more of an Army Navy issue. I'm trying to figure out what's what. Basically, you can tell no one wants to own it. At the end of the day, they send DOD, Defense Criminal Investigative Service, Office of the Inspector
Mm-hmm.
General, Air Force Special Investigations, Army Criminal Investigative Division, Major Procurement Fraud, and they interview with me with NCIS, and they tell me that they've got all kinds of different departments of government involved. But then they offer me no legal protections when I get more stalking and hacking and threats from the state and discover more packages and discover that my address is a White House on the other side of town with
Mm-hmm.
FedEx. The DoD doesn't seem to care. So then that tells me that the collection was probably a setup. Before the collection, Reed told me that I shouldn't care, or Reed, he said I shouldn't care if my site gets broken into and the stuff gets wiped out because I've already made my reports.
Okay.
So long story short, the state, everything gets picked up. They tell me they're going to put everything back together. We do the soft opening event, which you can watch on
Yep.
KX News. And Josh Teagan touts how great everything is and how it's wonderful that we're bringing the facility back from the cold and, getting all the jobs getting ready to go in. There's emails with Commerce where they're trying to get me to agree to do a statewide promotion after the event. Everyone's thrilled with it. And they know there's all kinds of emails and discussions between me and Shaden because Jessica had to take a family leave about how crazy, things are and there's still stuff to resolve. And we're working on the rest of the finance that Jessica promised because we didn't go to media. That's in writing. And
When you say
so,
writing,
then
is
it's
that going
all,
to be in the
uh,
document pack or is that somewhere else?
yeah, all
Okay.
included.
Perfect.
Um, so, then I get a call by someone who fears for safety, who quietly said, "You need to come and see this," and managed to locate physical records because a server had been destroyed, and gives me about 150 records showing that everything that I had just reported as federal crimes and got picked up and got confirmation of declaring my factory a crime scene and got confirmation of federal false claims and false statements investigations into the DoD malfeasance there, that the state was directly connected, and so were teams from Hoven and Kramer.
Wow.
And at that point, when I was handed the documents, I started to shake again uncontrollably. And I started to read them. And the more I read, the more I realized Dave Lehman knows every single thing I've been talking
Wow.
about. And he calls me all the time and pretends to be my
Yeah.
friend. And he knew I was being stalked. He knew I was being threatened. He knew I was being harassed. I'm going to share audio of Jessica Took acknowledging that by March, I've already had my seventh or eighth serious stalking
Sure.
incident. And he did nothing. So I start making polite phone calls because I'm terrified in August. And I call, for sure, Jessica Took Rich Garman and Shane Nakis, or
Mm-hmm.
Dave Lehman. and spend over an hour with Rich, a couple hours with Jessica, a couple hours with Dave. And I started asking questions about what we just found. And Rich goes into a panic. And Rich is basically, oh, I wasn't there when all this happened. It
Oh, so
wasn't
he
me.
starts immediately
And I said,
denying any
really?
involvement.
Yeah. And he says, that was people before me. And I said, but did you know about it? And he said, well, Dave told me as soon as he spoke with agents, and every week our team gets updated. And so then I said, have you guys been acting in a way? So let me phrase this
Mm-hmm.
another way. I'm concerned that you've been motivated or incentivized as the Department of Commerce to act in ways which might hinder my ability to perform on my loan because of this process being dragged out. And he said, you might be
Hmm.
right.
That's
And then he asked me to put together like a solution framework because he wanted Commerce to be discharged from any past, present, or future liabilities. And God only knows what else they did behind the scenes that I don't know. And then Jessica was promising me on recording a lot
mm-hmm.
more money and was telling me that since I didn't go to media, they would do more money and I shouldn't worry about that, that it'll just be the next board meeting and it's just a matter of getting it scheduled. So they just approve. And I was talking to her about Dave Lehman, and she was telling me that Dave probably thought that nothing would ever surface, and that's why he lied to me. And then I was talking about Jim Albright and my concern that by the time the soft opening took place, it seemed like no one had fully told him what was going on yet. Because I had recordings of Jessica in June where she and Shaden said that they weren't telling everyone yet. Everything, they were saying that there were a lot of issues and that it's perfectly okay that we're delayed, but they're not sure who all in Bismarck might be involved. And after we get the collection, she and Shaden tell me they can start telling everyone. So I just assume they've told the board
Sure.
everything. But Jim talks to me and my production manager, and he shakes my hand and he tells me, I hear you have all these local issues and it's really been impacting you getting started, but we're so glad you're here and it's so wonderful. And I said, Jim, said it's more than local issues. And this is only the first time I've spoken with him since my loans
Sure.
were approved. And he said, well, what do you mean? And he kind of gets this confused look. I said, they didn't tell you? And he said, no. And I say, we were just declared a federal crime scene by the Department of Defense. And I've been threatened and harassed and stalked all over the place. And then he got really concerned and said, no investor should ever have to deal with that. And he said, well, what happened and who? And I start showing him
Sure.
pictures and I tell him Benchmark. And then he tells me I'm a supplier to Benchmark.
What?
And then
Yeah,
I
some RVs.
say, and there were locals that were running the scheme. And he wants to know if Tuttle was involved. And I said, Tuttle was the local scheme leader. And then he departed me and my manager and didn't want to talk any further. And that was the last I spoke with him. And he led misuse allegations against me a few months later. And I've been denied access to the board of the development fund for over 14 months now. And I've had millions and millions of dollars of financial
Mm-hmm.
offers, one after another, since last fall, and they get blocked. And then the development fund defaulted my loans. So basically, once they realized we had the records, they cut off all communication. I heard through a third party that they were never going to talk to me again in September. So I sent an email that I'll also include where I said, just to be clear, no lawsuit is ever coming, ever. I just want to figure out how to work together and navigate a landmine of conflicts because you're a conflicted lender to me. You never should have lent to me in the first place on this site. And now we just have to figure out how I can move forward with all my partners and know that you're not going to do anything in the background. And so that's what they said they wanted. And then Shaden held a board meeting on October 10th of 2023, told the board I wanted more money and I threatened to sue, even though weeks earlier he had an email saying I will
Mm-hmm.
never sue. And he wouldn't let me in the meeting. And he told the board that I also said Commerce isn't supportive. And so they were already spinning a narrative to the board. Then, a couple days after my September email, they subjected me to a performance audit, told a group of legislators that they were sure that I misused funds and they were going to find it. and that was Jim Albright, Shade Nakeson, and
Sure.
Rich Garman. And then fast forward to the beginning of October, legislators set up a meeting with me and Drew Wrigley. As soon as he found out I was attending, he canceled it. His assistant, Susan, said I might be a lunatic. Then the media started doing stories through Michael Standard. I don't know if his Chinese connections caused him the conflicts or if he just felt immense pressure from the state, but he started writing hit pieces with the CTE Center and with commerce accusations of misuse of funds that actually contained omissions and misstatements. And it was, he watered down the facts of what actually happened to the point where his articles were unrecognizable in terms of the crimes, and he made it look like a local fight, which matches the state's narrative of local issues, is all they wanted to boil it
For
down to.
sure.
And so the misuse article, then in January of this year, from Dustin Gowrilow's records, there's an internal article or internal email from Dave Lehman to state communications team where he says, better late than never, LOL, when the state, when he discovers that 2 months later, the Bismarck Tribune has run the news article about me misusing funds in the headline.
Okay.
So that's the same within 2 or 3 days of me receiving a $6.5 million offer from someone out of state that got train wrecked when Commerce refused to engage. Then I had a bank tell me that they wanted to mortgage the facility with me in November when the misuse allegation came out, but that the head of the bank was afraid because they were threatened that if they lent to me, that their Bank of North Dakota assets would be impacted. And then we got into November 20th. So during the month of November, after the
Yep.
article ran and after I responded to the performance audit and uploaded more records than they asked for, and gave them full access to my facility, or offered that I would go there later when they were refusing to come to the site, and they refused. I uploaded my entire ledger history, and they didn't ask for bank statements, and I volunteered every bank statement I had, dared them to find a dollar
For
in
sure.
misuse, and then I uploaded recordings of Jessica Took telling us how to spend our money. And their original allegation, which they thought they had in the bag, was that I wasn't authorized for remediation. But between the emails we had traced with Jessica, that they might not have thought to go check them all, in between the recordings we had, including meetings with agents, where one meeting with the FBI and FAA, with Jessica sitting next to me, I say, we're doing everything they're telling us to do step by step, and it's really expensive, and we're doing it. And so, I mean, we had all this evidence, and we started uploading it to them. And then they emailed me on November 20th, 2023, and they said, please execute this document before a notary. And it was a 21-month notary backdated mortgage agreement that started on February 24th, 2022. On November 20th, 2023, it was sent. They wanted me to go perjure myself before a notary and say that I signed this document on February 24th, 2022, restructuring my loan into a first position mortgage from a subordinated working capital agreement.
Whoa.
And then I got an immediate letter of support from the local community economic corporations, 3 of them, and they told the state in polite words to get off my back, said that they were stepping up financial support from the community, said that the state needed to finish the rest of its loan at a bare minimum that was already authorized, and that they needed to let us mortgage the site and stop interfering. And then in Dustin Gowrilow's records, after I emailed and said that's illegal, there's records about 2 weeks or a week and a half later of Shade Nakeson and Jessica Took talking about strategizing with Jim Albright, talking about trying to figure out how to take a position on my assets, talking about going back into the original loan covenants, including video presentation, trying to find out if I did anything wrong in that process, presumably leverage that they could use to default me, and then talking about trying to figure out how to get me to sign the mortgage. And they say that I need to talk to, or they need to talk to Quinn. Well, on April 11th, they introduced Quinn Filing as the Special Assistant Attorney General for the North Dakota Development Fund. So do I 100% know that that's the Quinn? No, but they referenced his name several times as someone they were
Sure.
consulting with. And then we got more deals in the spring, and one of them was a $5.475 million cash deal. And on the recording, which any media that wants to request the recording, I will authorize, even though it's technically confidentially protected. I'm just going to say
Okay.
that now. Shaden Akes accused us with Rich Garman on the call and Jessica Took and my broker bringing the deal, accused us of misusing loan funds 3
Wow.
times, told us the misuse had been decided by the board, said there was going to be no discussion on restructuring my loan. And he took the call promising to be cooperative and tell my broker that he was going to move forward, and instead made accusations of misusing funds, insisted Jim Albright had no conflicts of interest, said it was final and decided. And then by the end of the call, it was just becoming so devolved that my broker was just beside himself. And then, and this is a broker, by the way, for the #1 commercial real estate company in the United
Okay.
States, does billions of dollars in commercial transactions, seriously qualifies properties and businesses. They were willing to accept the hair on the deal with my property history because our business and our credibility was so good. And so they returned to us 5 serious offers, and many of them were between 5 and over $7 million, including several purchase agreements. We couldn't get any closed because of Commerce's obstructions this first half of the year. And then Shaden had asked us to go off recording on February 29th. And when we went off recording, he told us, with Jessica and Rich Garman nodding, that they really want us to succeed, but they have to do what the Attorney General tells
Interesting.
them. And my broker can
Okay.
confirm that. So
Why should,
then
really
there's,
quick, why should Commerce Department be taking orders from the Attorney General
well, see, I don't know why my loan was in the Attorney General's
in
hands to
general?
begin
Sure.
with, but it seems like since September of 2022, I've been at the mercy of Commerce, and the Attorney General tried to make me sign the gag order. So presumably, the Attorney General and Commerce are working pretty closely together, because you have 3 people from the AG mentioned. You have probably Quinn Filing, you have definitely Dean Duplantis, and you have Agent
Sure.
Craig Zachmeyer. And one is a backdated notarized mortgage agreement that Commerce is trying to get Quinn's help to get me to sign, which they're asking me to perjure myself and commit forgery and counterfeiting
Yep.
under state law. The other one is, presumably assisted in making false or misleading statements to the IRS, because that's what the IRS told us about him. And then the other one is trying to get me quiet before I know what happened, so that if the state chooses to just railroad me and get rid of me, I'll never have any recourse to talk about it to any third party. And so that's all coming out of the AG's office, which is concerning. It's extremely
Right.
concerning that Drew won't talk to me.
So now it's a big back and forth
we've
between
been,
you, Commerce, and the AG trying to get this whole loan settled.
we've been strangled, and we only deployed out of a $5 million budget, $1.5 million, when the site got completely just clustered and everything was a mess. And then it's now cost us over $2 million just trying to, well, no, okay, I'll be very specific. Because we idled our burn so low, it's been an exact burn of 1.7 million that should not have had to have been spent. And we've had to come up with the additional money to keep surviving. Shaden has made comments to a state legislator that he doesn't know how we're still here and how we're doing it. There's been a comment Shaden made to a state legislator a few months back where he said if he recants the misuse allegation, then I might sue for defamation, which certainly they've created millions of dollars in damages to our business and reputation. And there's no doubt that when they created the misuse allegation, they knew it was
Right.
false. They've been trying to tell people recently that they want to move past the misuse allegation. They met with a lender and an investor at my site, and all my lenders this summer, in July, told everyone they want to put all the past in the rearview mirror and just move forward, and they'll be fully supportive with a deal from now on. So we had a huge deal put together where we wouldn't have to sell the site over the summer. And then the bank, I'll say, yeah, the bank asked for a letter of support and restructuring from Shaden. Shaden sends me an email and says, here's your letter, and gives me a backdated letter of default that's backdated to
Hmm.
February.
Wow.
And then changes it to a one sentence that says, we'll consider restructuring. And then that becomes useless. Jay Spieler blocks us from any help, Governor Burgum's chief of staff, and then tries to have 5 heads of commerce meet with legislators and tell them I'm a bad guy. One of the legislators had already been under non-disclosure for over a year vetting me, and even took years of all of our financials and knew everything about us, and said, this is just absolute nonsense. You guys have tied his hands, threw sticks in his spokes, and told him to go bike
And
racing.
Well,
And so,
I,
go
I was
ahead.
going to say this. We're over 2 hours in, which is incredible because it feels like,
Yeah, I'll end. I mean, I'm pretty much
yeah,
at
because
the
that's
tail
what I
end
was
of
going to
it.
say. You're pretty much now at the point where we got to this fall, where all of this has fallen through, and you're ready. And at this point, you have no options but to come public with it.
Yeah, offers and offers and offers to finish the original finance of our project, which I've talked about this in a press conference we
For
hosted with
sure.
legislators some months back, but you can look it up. I mean, there's a company called Lightship that's building a ground up RV design, which ours is more advanced in many ways. And they took over $60 million, have a 30,000 square foot facility, which is 3 times smaller than ours, took 4 years to get rolling. They're launching a $250,000 product and just getting ready to start building their first 50 units. We have worked since 2014, including the delays, on less than $4.8 million to date, including all of our research and development, maintaining 2 factories, owning and rebuilding 1 factory, and beginning to set up our tooling and inventory. I mean, we are the most cash efficient company in the United States RV industry. Our next nearest startup competitor hasn't gone for under 12 million bucks, and the average is 30 to
wow.
50 million in terms of setting up. And I want to make that very clear because the misuse allegation makes me angry. And
Understandable.
I should sue, but I know if I threaten to, then the state has an excuse to cut off communication with me. And so I'm not playing their game. I will not sue in order to move forward.
Right.
And I want everyone to know that I am playing beyond the rules I should be playing. The ordinary way by now is someone would just throw a lawsuit at him and just say, you guys have messed all this up and you've done all kinds of crazy business interference. I'm not going to do that. And I even offered last year at Rich's request that I would discharge them of even future liabilities that might be discovered arising from what we found, because I suspect that there's more mess I don't know
Sure.
about. So that's how crazy it was. So fast forward recently, the Senate Majority Leader, David Hogue, started getting involved during the legislative organizational session last week. There were 3 meetings devoted to our project. Commerce attended 1 meeting, which I wasn't allowed in. Brian Opp, Dave Lehman, Shaden Akison, Rich Garman, and Jim Albright were there. I'm told, I haven't had a chance to listen to the recording yet, but I'm told that Jim said that they were so disappointed in our soft opening. And I got a call from one of the legislators who attended, because there were over 30 legislators who attended the 3 different
Okay.
sessions. And the legislator said they tried to sow so many doubts into your project. He said they tried to kill you a different way. They stopped the misuse allegations, said they wanted to move past it, and said you just didn't have credibility, and they were just concerned that you would never progress. And that's why they froze your loans. And so he said they talked about the soft opening, Jim did, being an absolute disappointment. He said, can you prove that it wasn't? I said, absolutely. He said, that's all I need. Don't waste anybody's time with anything else. So I attached everyone who was in the meeting, except the one who I didn't have the email for, and attached like a minute and a half of recordings being praised for the soft opening, saying that the whole board, the whole EDNF team of commerce, and everybody who attended thought it was amazing. Our progress is amazing. And once we turn our focus on the rest of the production, it's just going to be extraordinary. And then I attached a recording saying that it's perfectly okay that we're behind and we're doing everything that is under the authority of NDDF.
Wow.
And then Representative Hoverson replied with everyone on copy and said something to the effect of, interesting, looks like Charles needs to be in the room from now on. And I was told that Dave Lehman wouldn't look anyone in the eyes, and he was rocking his chair back and forth so hard that one senator said he wanted to stomp on the chair leg and keep him on the ground. And, you know, they won't talk with me, they won't engage. And so then I was told that the majority leader said, well, aren't you going to talk to Charles? And then after I sent those recordings, they emailed and said they had a very productive meeting with the legislators. And I knew that not to be the case because legislators had already told me if we didn't know your history, we would have thought you were a
Sure.
shyster. And so then they met with us Friday. We brought our investor to the table. We brought our current lenders to the table who offered to restructure into equity. And they put a package together that was already together in July, just with a few modifications that the lender wanted, and said, here's another deal. And then they said that they could not even, Shaden and Brian, could not even commit to a number of months when they would begin to take this to the board.
Wow.
And
Why?
there were 4 legislators on call. And then afterwards, one of the legislators who was new to things spoke with a senator who had been in this for a while. And he told me on Monday, he said, now that I know that this is the same dance you're dealing with for, more than a year, he said, it's very disturbing. And so then we had another meeting today where they refused to let us in the board meeting. They refused to have us present to the board or tell the board the real facts, and met with all the same people that met on Friday, except short 2 legislators, and again offered the same deal. And they could make no commitments as to timelines to even simply provide a letter that says they'll cooperate and run the deal that's requested.
So basically, they have a way out. The Commerce could go and no longer be on the hook.
They're holding my loan. They're holding my loan in technical default, which had 3 more years of renewals on it, even if you don't change the covenants, and still had $203,000 more to disperse, even if you don't change the covenants. Right. And they're holding it hostage, hoping they'll bleed me dry, and then I'll leave the state. And I have personally guaranteed all the funds into this business. I've gone all in, and I'm going to outlast them. And I will do it if it costs me everything I have. And it already has. And it's cost me my safety. It's cost me a lot of peace of mind and well-being. But I'm going to continue to make sure that the story is told so that no one else ever has to go through this again. And that's where I'll leave it.
Very good.
Fantastic. Thank you for telling your story with us, Charles. We appreciate you giving us the opportunity to be the medium to do so. We appreciate you telling the story and getting it out there to be told. Like you said, this was a horrible experience for you. This takes a lot of effort and bravery for you to come out and say all of this. So we appreciate you doing so. And thank you for speaking and giving us this opportunity and giving us this series of podcasts that we are able to put out there. And you are able to tell your story.
I appreciate it. And I thank you guys for the platform. And I've always said, I want the truth told. And the evidence that will come out, you're not going to be able to tell another story with the evidence. And I'm not withholding or hiding anything material.
Right.
Everything that's going to be laid out, people can see it for themselves, how bad it is. They're probably going to realize it's worse than I'm describing it because it's hard to characterize how terrifying it was.
So if you go to mydakota.com, or if you go into the description for the YouTube video for this, you will find a link to an article that will have this video as well as links to the evidence documents supporting what was talked about in this podcast today. Those documents will be supplied by Mr. Charles Hoefer. So again, I want to echo what Kyler said. Do appreciate you coming on. Kyler, the way you said it made it sound like this is all coming to an end and that we'll never.
No, it's
but
not.
It's
That's
not
the
coming
best
to an
part,
end.
Yeah.
It's not coming to an end. So there is an announcement that's probably already come out about a live stream that's going to be happening. So if you're watching this in retrospect, make sure that you do go and watch that live stream as well, because it's going to have some experts on there talking about some of the violations that were done and what the impacts of those could be in the aviation industry. So very good. All right. Well,
Thank you,
absolutely. Thank you. Without further ado, thank you for watching this episode of Indie Talk, where we have continued our conversation with the Dunseith Debacle. Be sure to like and subscribe. Make sure you stay tuned for more updates. We'll continue to follow this as it continues to develop in real time. Want to say again, thank you to Mr. Hoefer, and thank you to you for watching this episode. Thank you, and have a great day.